LinkedIn presents.
Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Tina Berger about the transformative potential of deep listening and emotional receptivity. Tina Berger, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited for this conversation today. We're going to be focusing on the transformative potential of deep listening and emotional receptivity. This is something you spend a lot of your time focusing on and working with clients and organizations. And I think it holds a lot of value and meaning, really any time, but I think particularly in today's world of tumult and challenge and crisis and pandemic. I think everyone is struggling, and coming out of the pandemic, we're going to shift yet again and have to adapt and adjust. And with that comes stress and anxiety and emotional trauma. And that requires compassion and empathy in order to help our organizations thrive and for our people to be productive. And so these are the types of things that we'll discuss in relation to listening and being emotionally receptive. As we get started, I wanted to read Tina's bio for everybody. Tina Berger holds an MBA in global energy and advises Fortune 500 corporations through strategic digital transformations. Having engaged deeply with the challenges faced by corporate executives and staff for more than 20 years, she now advocates a systemic reset, collectively reimagining of our economic paradigm such that they serve the global good and the needs of future generations. She writes and speaks on the power of receptivity and co-creative innovation. You can learn more at www.tinaberger.com. Again, wonderful background. I'm super excited for the conversation. Before we really dive on in, anything you would like to share with listeners by way of your personal background or context?
I think that pretty much covers it. What I will say is I'm a quirky combination of things. So you talked a little bit about my my work history, and my focus on receptivity started out as personal. So I'm also a 20 plus year practitioner of yoga and meditation, and a studier of awareness practices and consciousness. So I have this duality in my experience and in my own curiosity that enlivens my professional life as well. And so my work in receptivity kind of came from an individual exploration first and then kind of became organizational.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And I think that's usually the way it works and is most effective. When we experience something, a phenomenon, we can practice it. We can learn to grow within whatever that concept or sphere is, and then we can share it with other people. And so I think it's great that you've developed as a meditation practitioner and with yoga and receptivity, and now you get to pay it forward and you get to help others in organizations and in their personal life figure out how they can be more receptive and more emotionally in tune, listen deeper, and ultimately, hopefully, have better, stronger, more sustainable relationships, whether it's at home, at work, in the community, whatever.
Yes. So part of what put me on this path to begin with is recognizing that that there's an inherent bias. Like as I began to develop my own sense or my own work, do my own work in becoming a better listener, becoming a better friend, and able to share emotional presence with folks. Beginning to recognize the communal effects of some of the systems that we have in place. We're a very individualistic kind of culture. We value the individual experience, and that is absolutely half of our experience. And then the other half of our experience is that we're all in this collective boat together, this kind of global world boat together. And so that's the other half of our experience. And so what I would say, my own practice and my own individual experiments, and I would say my own individual failures as well, have taught me is that we have a need to balance this out. So in our culture and in our workplace, there's an emphasis on being assertive, of getting your voice heard and in the room, and of what I would kind of call or the thinking and planning and rational and deductive and linear and directive part of our human expression. And so, in some models, if you think about some of the more ancient models, that's kind of the yang, or the masculine assertive focus, and the pieces where and that's what you get paid for. That's what you get recognized for. That's what you get good grades for being able to do. Get your goal and grind it out. Really useful. But there's also this whole other aspect of self and of the human experience, which is about really being able to take in not just information, not just listening for facts and logic and reason, but also take in what's not necessarily being seen or said. So there are different levels of listening, and so we can listen to what words someone is saying, and in the background of our mind be formulating a response, or thinking of a position, or wondering how it relates to how our own experience or perception has been formed. Or we can just be present with that person and that whole entire person's being in that moment without having our own agenda or thoughts in that process. And so that's a transformational practice, when you can actually get to the place where you're really with somebody. That's deeply receptive. And we don't have a lot of experiences as a culture for knowing how to do that, both just in individual conversations and engagements, but also in an organizational level.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think, like you said, especially organizationally, assertiveness, the assertive style in leadership and in just corporate America generally, means that people really aren't trained to listen in the deep way that you're describing. We everyone's heard about the power of listening and the importance of making sure that you're doing reflective listening and those sorts of things. And so what ends up happening is, in order for someone to feel like they're being a good leader, or in order, if they're getting reviewed, they want to be seen that way. And so they'll go through the motions of listening and acting like they're listening. But it's a fundamentally different thing when you come to it with your own preset agenda, not really seeking to understand, but you're just going through the motions. And what you're describing is something very different, that we really come to the person, we be with the person, our whole self is with their whole self, and we just being there with them, listening, observing, watching. As you were describing everything, I was thinking about emotional intelligence and emotional quotient. That's a big part of deep listening, is that you are just in tune to the other person, and you can pick up on things that aren't said. You can pick up on the hidden emotions that maybe there's a little bit of emotional leakage that slips out, in little facial expressions and such. But otherwise, unless you're super attentive and in tune, you're not going to notice those sorts of things. And that just requires us to slow down a little bit, to be ready and willing to just be with the other person. And that's not how our fast-paced culture, in America at least, very individualistic culture, corporate culture, that's not how it's set up. That's not the norms and the expectations that most people have. Yet that's what sets apart the greatest leaders, what sets apart the greatest teammates and the greatest collaborators and innovators, is that they really truly have that commitment to deep listening and inquisitiveness for deep reflective listening, and ultimately they'll give the time and priority to it.
What you said there is very significant, related, especially like all of what you said was significant, but there was a piece that I think gets missed a lot in organizations that need to innovate, and that is the way that deep listening allows you to truly integrate different points of view. The way that we have innovation sessions often is really a competitive session. We'll have 8 people around the table. Everyone comes with their idea already about the best way to address the problem. We take turns presenting and advocating and asserting for our idea. We may modify it slightly, as you say, to kind of make people feel like they got heard, but we're committed to our idea. If you really let go of your idea for the time that someone else is explaining theirs, and you really allow yourself to take it in, it will change your idea. It will change your notion of what's a good solution, because people have good reasons. And some of the reasons that they have may not be the ones that are on paper. It may be an affective, it may be an emotional understanding that they have. It may be a sensitivity to something you didn't know. And I learned these things the hard way because I have a strong intellect. So I often had the idea that, well, I know what the right solution is to this. And like you say, I need to, I'm not a big fan of the term buy-in anymore, but I need to get buy-in for my idea. Well, that's not listening. If what your agenda is to get buy-in to a solution that you've already created, then you're not really in an innovative space. You're not really in a deeply receptive space. And, the way that the assertive point of view, and the deductive, logical, rational point of view says you do these things and then ultimately you reason your way to the best solution. Whereas, if you're being very receptive, then what you're doing is you're in a flow. That is a very different feeling, a flow, than a process. Both are valuable. They have different applications. We're really good at the one and not really good at the other because flow is not as predictable. Flow doesn't really look efficient. We have a real value for what we consider to be efficiency. But you are not integrating if you are being process driven and efficient, and you're not really benefiting. And so from all of the wisdom around the table, and so some of the folks who have over time not been able to, I would say, bring the most value of their own gifts in the contexts that we have organizationally are people who are slow, more integrative, more thoughtful processors of information. And so they're not there with the idea right when it's time to brainstorm. And so 2 days later, they're still frustrated from that whole session. And you missed some really important, not you, but like we missed as a team, some really important insights and probably something that should have shaped our solution and would have shaped it better.
As you were describing that, I was thinking of some of my own experiences with brainstorming, with quote unquote innovation sessions. And most of them have been like you just described. The difference and the ones that have truly produced great, innovative, creative outcomes have always been of the more collaborative, intentionally listening sort, where it wasn't competitive. People would share their ideas, but they weren't advocating necessarily for their ideas. And it wasn't like a fixed pie where only one or two ideas could win. It was truly just like, hey, let's get ideas out on the table. Let's talk about them. Let's integrate. Innovation isn't about coming up with something brand new that no one has ever thought of before. Sometimes that's the type of innovation that occurs. Most of the time, it's just combining things that no one's ever thought of before. It's being the ultimate aggregator of disparate pieces of knowledge, information, different disciplines. Just being able to pull those together, and a lot of people can't see that. They can't see the big picture because they're so focused on their narrow view, their narrow piece. But when you get into this receptive space, and you described it as flow, where nobody has their own personal agenda, you're just trying to get to great outcomes, great solutions. Then I think about they're more rare, but those types of experiences that I've had, those are the ones that have produced all of the greatest creative and innovative types of processes, programs, ideas, things in my career that have pushed me forward, have pushed my team forward the most. And it's funny too, because afterwards I always sit back and I just think, wow, I was so dumb. Why didn't I see this before? Like now it's so obvious. Why did I never see this before? I may have been working on this problem, this issue for months, for years, and trying to coming up with some reasonable approaches to deal with it. But then at some point you make these new connections that you never saw before, and all of a sudden, voila, it's you have your solution, and it's ingenious, but it's also often fairly simple. It's just combining different things. You're never going to get there unless you're truly deeply listening and unless you're receptive.
There's two things that you said. One is it's rare, which is concerning, right? Because at a time where we have such tremendous challenges,
let me say too, in my experience, it's been rare. It doesn't need to be rare though. It's been rare because that's the way we set up the meetings. That's the way we set up the environment. But hopefully we can move beyond that.
So the two things you said that stuck with me, one is it's rare, and for exactly the reasons that you're saying, is we don't really know how to cultivate that kind of space very well. It's just not, it hasn't been the focus. It hasn't been, we haven't fully understood its potential. Once you feel it, you experience it, you go, oh, that's how this is supposed to go. That's the other thing. Is so many people haven't been in situations where they've had that experience. And so the question becomes, how do we open space for that? Like, what are the conditions that create that kind of potentiality in our organizations? And how do we give people those experiences so they can recreate and understand what we're talking about when we say, here's what flow feels like. Here's what a nurturing, psychologically safe environment feels like for an innovative process to emerge or for an innovation to emerge. So I think those are some of the things that motivate me in the workplace, and also, beyond it. So what I said, what you read in my bio is really what I'm about. It's really kind of backing up from within the organization. So it's working on all these different levels. I'm working on my own receptivity and ability to be emotionally available and present when I wasn't raised to believe those things were important or valuable. And then also to figure out how to work with that in organizations and groups, but then backing up even further to go, well, what's happening at a global level, and are we really listening to what the earth and to what life is telling us? Are we being receptive enough, or are we keeping our heads down and just plowing forward with the things that have, worked in the past? Certainly there are some things that have worked in the past, but I think we're getting to the limits of some of that when we look at some of the feedback, whether it's scientific, emotional, what we see on Facebook and interactions and dynamics there, what we see in the spike of mental health issues. Are there some things we need to adjust? Are we listening well enough? And my sense is, we're too focused right now on action and deciding and being correct, and not really fully taking in enough of the feedback that we're getting about what is and isn't working.
Yeah, I think that's right. And something you just said also connected, it resonated with me. I've been fortunate to have some of those experiences that I can draw on and say, yeah, these were, I don't know what to call them other than it was flow. It was like inspirational, right? Like you just have these kind of aha moments click, and all of a sudden things fit into place in ways that seem so obvious now, but you never saw it before. Having experienced those types of situations, I'm in a better position now to try to recreate those environments, but a lot of people haven't had that experience. All they've ever done is, been in meetings that are competitive, agenda-driven meetings, and so we have a chance to model it though for other people. And the more people we help to have those types of experiences, and then we can debrief those experiences and talk about what happened, why they worked, why they were effective. Then we're training up our team, we're training up our people to be the next generation of leaders, or at least great collaborators, so they can do great work. And, helping them to understand exactly what we're talking about, the power of deep listening. Ultimately, that's the only way we're going to solve some of the most complex, messy, challenging problems the world is facing, is if we can take that kind of an approach. And, I often say it on the podcast, but emotional intelligence, EQ, is just as important, perhaps more important than IQ. Some of the quote unquote dumbest people I know are the highest IQ, most raw intelligence types of people. But because they're so stuck in their understanding and they know they're right, and they have their reasons and they're very smart, they cut themselves off to the flow, to the inspiration, to the connection with others. And so they end up missing entire integrated pieces that otherwise, someone else who may not have the same level of traditional quote unquote raw IQ intelligence does pick up on, can see, can work effectively with other people, has that emotional agility, and thereby, has the potential to create those dynamic teams that can innovate. That's what organizations need more of. So I certainly want people on my team that are intelligent, that are capable, that have skills and competencies, but as important as their raw, technical knowledge in their field, their ability to work well together in a team, their ability to respect each other, to honor each other's perspectives, and to listen and to allow for others to share, those emotional quotient elements. That's just as important, perhaps more important to me.
Yes. And for people who are emotionally sensitive, for people who are integrators and kind of deep processors, and for people who actually understand and recognize implications that are bigger picture implications, which sometimes slows down decision making. And for people who are taking in, so you could say they're hugely sensitive because they're taking in emotional information, but they're also taking in more information generally. This slows people down in their decision-making processes. And those people have not been rewarded for that in the past. And what you have is a lot of leaders, because leaders are people who have been successful in the systems that reinforce all of these ways of thinking, as you say, the intellect, the logical deductive reasoning aspects, the directive aspects, the assertive competitive aspects, the structured aspects. We've been reinforced, rewarded, advanced for those things. So as challenging as it is on that side to learn to stop and listen, we have to also understand that people who actually lead with the more receptive aspects, who are more in that emotional EQ space, have not been rewarded for those things. So there's a double challenge of one, yes, our organizations don't, but also as individuals, we're taught to be biased against that kind of expression. So recognizing that, being intentionally inclusive of it, looking for people, as I say, sort of get the wrong people in the room, and figure out, and then, as you say, we have to be able to create those spaces. We have to find ways to get this. Most of the time, people who are in leadership positions, they want to do things better. That's why they're there. They just have a very clear idea of what better is, and they're missing a lot of key. That doesn't mean that their better isn't better. It just probably means it's not as much better as it could be. Their perspective can be informed greatly. And when you said, your experiences, those sessions where kind of your whole being has been appreciated and invited, and there's this kind of democratic sharing that's happening, and people are, being able to really explore a much broader range of ideas, feelings, perspectives about something in service of, well, let's see what happens, let's see what flows. You said there's an inspiration. That's the piece that we're missing is, if you think sort of receptive and assertive, the assertive side of the breath is the exhale, and the inspiration is the inhale. And inspiration is kind of mysterious. We don't deal with mystery very well in our system. It's mysterious, and surprises happen when you're in an inspiring space. And we don't deal very well with surprises. We want all the surprises to be outside of the workplace. We want to be able to predict what happens in the workplace. Well, that means that your change, your innovation has a limit to it.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Tina, it has been a real pleasure. We've only scratched the surface. I would love to have you back so we could continue the conversation, but noting the time, I just wanted to make sure that I gave you a chance before we close to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your work, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Well, you can find more about me on my website, which is tinaberger.com. I also have a book out which explores my own experience. It takes you on my journey of understanding what was missing within me, what I had closed myself off to, and the receptive aspects of my being in order to be successful in my job and in education, my educational work. And so hopefully that's a useful point of departure. And you can find me on all the Amazon and IndieBound and all of the major online bookshops. The thing that I would suggest for people that are most interested in understanding what is meant by this is, or what I would actually say, the thing that's been most transformational for me in my life is to have a daily practice that I do that is receptive, and I don't offer anyone in particular that works for everybody. I would say that look around and find the things that speak to you and motivate you. It can be something as basic or as seemingly mundane as watering your plants with a certain kind of receptive point of view. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes or an hour of Buddhist sitting meditation. So find something that speaks to you and that puts you in a receptive place at least once a day.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you, Tina. It has been a real pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Tina can do to help you and your organization. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page And please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.